So, my name is Vincent. I was just a graduate of Visual Studies and Fine Arts and graduate program as of a year ago. And currently a UX designer at IBM, and it looks like a few folks have a sense of what that is, but very simply, I basically create software product for IBM. We collaborate with business folks, developers to deliver really complex systems to our clients. And so I'm going to be talking about purposeful play in design and how the studio arts approach in a liberal arts education can be a foundation for change. So just as an overview, I want to address the expanding role of design over the past half century, but very specifically, I'll focus in on the past 15 or 20 years. And then I want to talk about play in design and what purposeful play sort of is all about, and how organizations are using this notion of play as a means of innovation. And then finally, I want to try to tie this back to the liberal arts and what programs like visual studies sort of empower designers to do. So it's a lot, so I'll try to make sure that there's time for everything. But why design as a lens? And in some ways, it feels very obvious because it's been associated with craft and decorative objects. But I think, as we'll come to see, there's a different sense of design. But I wanted to start with the Dewey reading that we have for today, where he says the present function of the liberal arts college is to use the resources put at its disposal by the humanities, vocational disciplines, and sciences to appraise the needs and issues of the world in which we live. And I think as a optimistic recent graduate, I think we can extend that a little further and say that liberal arts education should empower students to change the world. And ideally, this should be in a positive way. And so I'll go into three little vignettes, three examples of change from a variety of organizations that ideally are trying to implement this change in a positive way. So the first is the VA Center for Innovation. That's trying to basically improve the VA healthcare delivery system by implementing a veteran-centered approach to their diagnosing of these issues. And in 2014, they published a report that's publicly available where they outlined this new, radical process for identifying these problems. Secondly, let's talk about Bank of America, who partnered with IDEO, Global Design Consultancy, to in 2005 launch the Keep the Change program, which some of us might actually use today, a family member or two might do. Essentially, trying to get people to open savings accounts and inspire folks who don't usually save to use their savings account. So if you make a purchase, they round up to the nearest dollar and transfer that money over to your savings account automatically and for you, inspiring people who haven't been very good at savings to do so. And they did this through a design-centered approach where they conducted research with families in the target market and found that a lot of mothers were doing this in their checkbooks and rounding up. And then use that insight to create this program. And then finally, we have in the southern borough of London a project called Circle, which was done by Hilary Cottam, who's a social entrepreneur and designer, who's focusing on themes of caretaking and loneliness in an aging population. And this work has gone on to different parts of England, actually, and has been funded in various respects. Two or so have fallen off, but two still remain. And these circles became these social hubs for the elderly to connect and to take a new perspective on welfare, essentially. And so I think my point here is that many organizations are trying to design as an approach for affecting change and solving some of their complex problems. And in respect to that circle project that I just talked about, Alice Rosselin, who's a design critic and design writer for the New York Times, she said that traditionally the only contribution a designer would have made to such a project would have been to produce a logo or leaflets explaining the concept to prospective participants. And so here what we see is that design contributions in general are broadening. And so this is in the past 15 or 20 years been sort of lumped under this term design thinking that's been really grasped by the business world. By the business world, and it's a very controversial topic among designers, traditional people who have studio arts foundation. And Richard Buchanan, who's a professor in the School of Management at Case Western Reserve University, he writes, it's a very ambiguous term that's gotten out of hand. For some people it's a cognitive process, for others it's a set of skills and habits, for some it's a business slogan, design thinking. And I'm afraid it's deteriorated into that in many ways, particularly at a company like IBM, who worked on that keep the change endeavor. So the formula that they regard as design thinking. And this is often what it looks like. It looks like folks around a whiteboard using 3M Post-its, solving problems. There's usually Sharpies involved. And they're figuring work out. They're figuring out these really complex problems together. But I think probably the most frustrating part about design thinking as a concept is that it's been distilled into this sort of easy-to-use, anyone-can-do-it framework, popularized by the Stanford D School, where first you empathize with the users of your product or service, you define the parameters, make sure you're solving the right problem, you ideate very broadly around that problem, coming up with lots of potential solutions. Then you converge, you take some of the best solutions and you prototype them out to a level of fidelity where you can then test with actual users and get feedback on those prototypes to make sure you're heading in the right direction. And for our purposes here, I want to focus on the ideate and prototype phases. But I think what we see is that visual thinking happens throughout this entire process. And I want to return to Hillary Cotton, the designer behind the Circle endeavor, who she's actually has a social sciences background, and she only found design in university, where her professor Robert Chambers was doing research in India, and she said that he had this breakthrough idea that if you get people to physically model or draw their ideas, you'll have a different dialogue with them, more honest and less offensive. Designers use those tools instinctively. And I thought this was so interesting, considering that one of the first endeavors I had to do at IBM was run one of these workshops. And so there I am, telling people what they're about to do. And what I found about design thinking in this term is that it's really, I find most useful for non-designers actually in these very highly interdisciplinary contexts. The work that we're doing right now, I should say, is we're working on a system with our partner Celgene, to pharmaceutical company, to streamline the process of monitoring side effects from their drugs. So not an easy problem at all. And we held one of these workshops to kick off the project. And when you have machine learning designers in the room, you have safety scientists and physicians, and you have quality and compliance professionals all in the same room, how do you talk to each other? How do you communicate? And so there were two takeaways from this experience. The first is visually modeling processes were really, really important. What is happening here looks a little messy, but to the folks that worked on it together, workshopping this very complex system, what happens is if you're a case processing manager, you map out the system visually in an interdisciplinary context. What you do is subject your work to the questions of other disciplines that can ask, does it have to be this way? And so, that a lot of the exercises that we did here, really got a lot of those questions going and questioning our assumptions about what they already knew about their system. And then secondly, it was interesting to think about different forms of argument making. Often in the liberal arts, our arguments take the form of an essay composition. Yet in these interdisciplinary contexts, communicating what you're trying to say when you're a scientist to a business person, that's a little tricky. And often this is becoming, these exercises, and I don't know exactly why we need to use Post-its, but these primitive forms of making an argument and convincing someone taking a position are actually quite useful when trying to convey an idea. And here we see one of our stakeholders mapping ideas on a chart whose axes are impact to the pharmaceutical space and feasibility. And when you subject that in a kind of critiquing atmosphere, you have a fundamentally different conversation about the system and where you're going. So I think this was a really unique experience. It was really interesting. I think I learned a lot from it. But at the end of the workshop, our executive stakeholder, he said something really interesting. He said, if I could be a designer, I would never want to grow up. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. We all kind of laughed about it. And then, it plays on the stereotypes that designers are, always having fun, and we're childlike. But I think he was getting at something actually more profound about this process. Firstly, design often involves being vulnerable in a way. And I want to reference the Grubbs reading that we have for today as well, where he said, sketching for him, or drawing design, this is a process through which ideas are made visually tangible, quickly analyzed, critiqued, improved, or discarded. And when you're a scientist, when you're an offering management person, a project manager, when you have your ideas put out there and potentially they don't have traction in this visual form, they might be discarded. That's a kind of vulnerable space to be in. And often as a designer that, I'm not doing design thinking all the time, but we're often that first step in the process where we get a lot of feedback and we need to we always get the feedback first. And so we always put our work out there for critique before it moves on to development, for example. And secondly is continuous evaluation. Grubbs says a quick sketch can expose the fault of a favorite idea, and another just as quickly can suggest a more valid solution. The repeated application of the drawing to the thinking through an idea brings fruition to the process. And I think of as a small child, all that flailing you're doing is actually gathering data about the world, and you're evaluating what works for you, what doesn't, and putting that together in order to make better judgment, have better judgments about the world. And then finally is this notion of making mistakes, which in design center circles we say is failing fast. You get something out there and then potentially it doesn't work out. Perhaps it leads to a dead end. At the very least, you've learned something from the series of drawing, and now I have less baggage to carry, is what Grubbs says. And the small child might see touch something that's too hot, or bite into the lemon and it's not as pleasant as they thought. And those are all learning experiences. And sometimes the happy accidents, we can actually take that and keep that in memory and use that for other productive purposes later. So as artists and designers, I think we bring this perception on ourselves about how unserious our work is when we say that, oh, we're just playing around, or we're messing around. I can't imagine how many times in a particular meeting I've heard this. But I think it's not unserious, it's actually quite purposeful. In design, we're often working with unclear goals, and by going through this process, we're trying to clarify what the initial intention is, what our goals should be in the first place. We very rarely just get a design brief and we can execute. And often there are infinite solutions to one of these problems as well. And so by playing around with form, we're actually trying to weigh the pros and cons so we can determine and make a judgment call on which is the best way to proceed. And finally, it's a process of rapid discovery as well. And I think this is actually what organizations are really interested in, what they're taking from the design process. Perhaps it's not everyone drawing every day, but it's this rapid discovery that they're looking to extrapolate from the design process and actually put into the organization. So I think for designers, we'll have to continually grapple with this perception of design from the outside world, what tools are best for practicing design, and the way our creative process is becoming this framework, this slogan. But I think for students of the liberal arts, we have to consider increasingly design-driven ways to contemplate or enrich human life, especially when this is happening in various industries, down to nonprofits as well. And to what degree do we want to see this in our education? And so I return to Buchanan here, who in his Wicked Problems in Design Thinking essay outlined the way the liberal arts have become increasingly fragmented into a quilt of specializations, is what I think he used. And I think about, I was looking at a talk, the ABCs of anthropology, that you can, go into so many different areas of anthropology, and it's all about expertise in that specific field. But what it leads to, here is fragmentation across the liberal arts that you can't integrate across them. He says, without integrated disciplines of understanding, communication, and action, there's little hope of sensibly extending knowledge beyond the library or laboratory in order to serve the purpose of enriching human life. But I think programs like visual studies were kind of a relief for me, in the sense that this is W.J.T. Mitchell, professor of English and Art History at Chicago. And he is one of the most interesting descriptions of visual studies, that he says doing visual studies is a kind of de-disciplinary exercise. It starts out in an area beneath the notice of other disciplines like art history, aesthetics, and media studies, the realm of the non-artistic, non-aesthetic, and unmediated or immediate visual images and experiences. And in visual studies, we get to ask the almost innocent questions about vision, visual culture, and seeing, and pull from disciplines as they serve our purpose. Now, Buchanan then outlines the way that design, as a disciplinary exercise in a way, is becoming a liberal art. He wants to see it as the liberal art of design thinking, and I tend to think this is really exciting, actually, for design and liberal arts education. And he says that it acts as an integrative force between signs, things, actions, and environments that address the concrete needs and values of human beings in diverse circumstances. The masters of this new liberal art technological culture, he says, are practical men and women, and the discipline of thinking that they employ is becoming accessible to individuals in everyday life, but I think is also important to the nature of our work as design thinking ways are entering organizations as well. So finally, I'll leave you with this quote. Hillary Cotton was asked if design thinking applies to her work, and she rejected that. And she rejected a lot of the terms that were applied to her work. She said what she's clear about is that design is a powerful tool for change. That working visually has been critical to getting new perspectives on old problems, getting people to share what's personal and what matters. Building these prototypes or working exemplars help get buy-in for implementation. Design is about creating, building. It's a powerful force. Critique is easy. Creation is what we need. And I think she'd also agree that we need it in the liberal arts as well. So that's all I have.